Hello friends, Tanya here with day 7 of the Spellbinders 2023 Crafty Advent Calendar. We're going to open up pocket number 7, and it looks like it is a layering stencil with a very geometric design that you could actually combine in a few ways. Now, to make this fairly simple for myself, I did ultimately put a dot in the upper right corner of each of these stencils so that it would be easier for me to remember which way they line up. I'm demonstrating how these layer together here. I'm using a red, a yellow, and a blue, and just putting these down over the top of each other, lining them up nicely. There are some registration marks in the corners of these stencils, so you could stencil through them and line up the corners through those same registration dots on each turn. Next, we're going to use the Merry Mugs Creations and the Whimsical Winter Critters from the Merry Mug and something Delights. Can't remember. It's the Nicole Spohr collection, and I created a polar bear coffee mug using the two different sets. I made the shimmeriness on this paper by putting the snow and ice luster polish on it before I die cut it. And this was just something I had stashed that I had been playing with the stamps or the die sets. We're going to add a little bit of shading with some antique linen distress inks and a blender brush. Not very much, just very softly so that it blends nicely. And you can see that I did create another ink blended or stenciled background. We're going to also use the Geo Snowflakes hot foiling plate and some Desert Storm cardstock cut to an A2 size panel. And I'm using Prism foil here, and that turned out just stunning. And then I decided I didn't want a white background on our stenciled component, and this is going to be kind of a coaster underneath our cup, or next to our cup. I'm using brushed corduroy, and what other? I think I started with the antique linen and it just wasn't quite dark enough. And this is kind of going with a cocoa feel, hot cocoa feel. So I'm going to use the brushed corduroy. Yeah, you get to see me do this twice. I am using a piece of Best Ever Craft tape to hold the stencil in place on one side. Two sides would have been better, but one side will do. Now that I've got all of the brushed corduroy applied, we're going to clean that off a little bit so I don't get the ink everywhere. And move to the next stencil. You can see my black dot on the upper right corner, helping me make sure that I don't spend a ton of time trying to get this lined up in the right orientation. The next color we're going to use is we're actually going to use this lavender blue opal polish. There is a similar opal polish in the website, on the Spellbinders website. First I tried using the sponge applicator that comes with it, but then I thought, you know, I could actually use this more like a paste and push that through the stencil with a palette knife, and that actually works very well. Of course, it doesn't dry as fast as when you use the sponge applicator, because the sponge applicator just applies a super thin layer on your project. This spreads very nicely, very smoothly across the stencil, and all of these pastes and polishes and gilding polishes, they are super flexible in how you use them. You can use them as watercolor paints, you can use them to just blend over your cardstock with the sponge, you can use them like the paste, you can use your fingertip to apply them in certain spots. Lots of ways you can use these. For our third stencil, after I get this lined up, we're going to use another paste. This is the Cosmic Shimmer Moonlight Pearl, and we're going to actually use that again with the palette knife. I did have to wait for the blue to dry. It took about 20 minutes. And I had washed off my stencil and palette knife well before I moved on to the next thing. This goes on very nicely. This is actually a little looser in its texture than the gilding polish, both of which are actually pretty easy to use. Just going to make sure I get good coverage in all of the stencil holes. I love this stuff. I've been using it a lot lately. It's similar to the snow and ice luster polish. You wouldn't have to have both of them. They could function similarly. This is kind of like the glacier paste from Nouveau, in that it's very flat. Even when it dries, it's very flat. It's a lot like foiling, actually, pretty close to foiling. I did use my heat tool to dry this faster because I was getting impatient, and you can see that the Cosmic Shimmer paste did puff up. It bubbled up, and I waited a few seconds for that to cool off, and I used my fingertip to squish it down, and that actually seems to have worked quite well. Now we're going to trim this down pretty closely. I think it ultimately ends up being just under, like, it's between 2 3/4 inches and 2 7/8 inches. Or is it 2 and, yeah, something like that. And then I go to find a scallop square. And these are really old. These are from probably 20 years ago when I first started crafting. And I found a size that would work well with this square. Die cut that from some brushed white cardstock, and then I found I needed to trim this a little bit more. I think we're going to trim it down to 2.5 inches square to make it fit nicely on that scalloped square. And there we go. That looks just the way I was looking for. Now I'm going to glue these together. I'm not going to put any extra cardstock behind this. I don't need it to be elevated off of the scalloped square. And then we're going to move on to some of the fun embellishments. Actually, no, we're not. We're going to use the Precision Layering A2. I think this is the B set. I trimmed it down to, this must be 3 it's either 4 by 5 1/4 or 3 3/4 by 5 inches. I think it's 3 3/4 by 5 inches. And I'm going to start adhering our little coaster and our polar bear. I did add some extra cardstock behind the polar bear and the coaster. And then I'm going to pull out the Santa's Sippin' Sayings and the Snow and Ice Luster Polish. I'm taking this strip of cardstock and putting the luster polish on it. Oh, I skipped. So I grabbed the stamp set. I showed you which stamp set I was going to use, but then I got sidetracked, as happens with my ADHD. Another thought hit. I wanted some snowflakes. So I used the Snow and Ice Luster Polish on the white to create that sparkly, icy look. And then I took the Pearl Luster Polish, gilding polish, and did some polishing on some of the same light blue as I used for the coaster to make that nice and shiny, because we're going to cut out some hearts. We're going to use some of the accessory dies from the Merry Mug Creations. There's this cute little 2 heart die and these snowflakes and the steam that rises out of the mug. I cut the steam from some vellum, and I'm just going to attach the tips of this inside the polar bear mug. And then we're going to I die cut a bunch of hearts and snowflakes, as many as I could get out of those pieces of scrap cardstock. And we will use, I think we use all of them, or most of them. So I am going to create a little trail of these hearts above our little polar bear mug, along with the steam. Just adding those with a little bit of glue. And there's our 3rd heart. Then we're going to add one of these snowflakes over on the corner of the coaster. And then I think about adding more hearts and decide that's not what I want to do there. Don't want another snowflake. Then I pulled out these sparkling sapphire Trinity Stamps rhinestones. They're a nice sapphire blue, opaque rhinestone, and I'll add one of those to the center of the snowflake and then two smaller ones next to it, just to add a little balance and add a little more of that nice deep sapphire blue. Next, we're going to move on to the sentiments. We're going to do some clear ink stamping here, some embossing ink stamping. I have two parts of sentiments that I'm going to create. We're going to emboss them with the Hero Arts brass embossing powder. It's a nice deep gold, brassy gold, and I think that goes well with the brushed corduroy that we used on our polar bear and with the craft cardstock. So we're going to stamp a sentiment for the inside of our card also. Again, prepping the paper with an anti-static powder tool, stamping it with my clear embossing ink. Then we'll sprinkle on the embossing powder, tap that excess off, and heat it with the heat tool. And we get a nice raised and shiny sentiment. I love the professional look that creates. And then on the inside of the card, I've used some painter's tape to secure all four edges of this stencil because I don't want to get any inking beyond the stencil. And I did cover up the registration marks on the corners also because I didn't want those to show. So I'm using a light blue ink here. I want a nice subtle stenciling on the inside of the card. Next, I'm going to use the second layer, and we're going to use the antique linen. I'm carefully taping the edges with the painter's tape, making sure to cover those registration marks again, and then using a little blending brush, I'm applying the antique linen. I pull this off, and after the reveal, I decided I didn't need any more ink blending there. So I'm going to die cut that sentiment using some of the precision layering dies, the very smallest ones, and I do some partial die cutting to get the exact length that I want. And I adhere the first sentiment, this one liner on the front, "You Warm My Heart," and on the inside I'm going to center the "Have a Cozy Christmas" in the middle of our tilted coaster. Then I'm going to use some more of those die cuts that we created. We've got 3 hearts on the right lower corner along with a snowflake. I'm going to adhere that snowflake. I just put a little glue on each of the tips and right around the center and adhere that. On the front of the card, I just did it on the center of the snowflake because I didn't mind if the ends popped up, but on the inside of the card, this is all going to need to be pretty flat. I added a small heart to the center of the snowflake, and we'll add 2 more hearts on the other end of the sentiment to finish off the inside of this card. I think this turned out adorable, and that layering stencil is very versatile. You can use this in a ton of ways, and I hope that this sparked some ideas for you. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up. If you haven't subscribed, now is a fantastic time to do that. If you're interested in any of the products that I used today, check that description box below. They will be listed and linked as always. I would love to hear what you think. Leave me a comment below. And until next time, here are a couple more videos you might enjoy. See you tomorrow. Bye-bye.